Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. So you all know my journey in the, health space and the functional medicine world has been a long one. I've been in this space specifically for 20 years. And before that, I was a microbiologist. So it kind of goes part and parcel, together. They're very related to each other. And it was interesting because the only reason I got into microbiology was because I wanted to go to conventional medical school. And for me, it wasn't the right choice because at the time I was never taught about integrative or functional medicine and didn't even know it existed, quite honestly. It wasn't until I had my own health challenges right after I graduated, actually when I was working as a microbiologist, that I became aware of the space. And I know I talked about that way back at the beginning of the this podcast. So if that's something that you're interested in, you could go back and listen to some of those episodes about how I got into this. It was like at the very, very beginning. And so, when I first found out about functional medicine and integrative medicine and all of the, more natural or traditional health care options out there, I was like, wow, like that made my world make sense because I felt like we were addressing root causes. And, as you grow in practice and you see what people are going through, you realize that these root causes are very deep. And in my opinion, and a lot of my colleagues now are seeing that they realize that all of these things that we address on the physiological and biochemical aspect of functional medicine are really just symptoms of much deeper things. And that's where we get into those stuck emotions and trauma and mindset and beliefs and all of those like internal things that we would categorize in the mind and spirit realm and not so much of the body. And it was, I would say for me, a little bit disheartening over the years as I have gone in and learned new tools and been certified in different modalities that help me address people, in mind, body, and spirit completely. I always like to say I address the whole person. I have the ability to do everything. But truthfully, if you get somebody's mind and spirit well, the body tends to take care of itself. And it has gotten me thinking, and I've had a lot of paradigm shifts and just changes in my philosophy across time. But a conversation that I had with a friend the other day, it was two conversations, actually. One was through text message and the other one was actual phone conversation. And my friend said to me, like, she's in the same place I am. And it's funny because I hadn't talked to her in probably a good 8 or 9 months. And she said to me, she's like, my health, I started having a flare. And I will tell you that this person, she and I have known each other for 12 years and we worked together in a clinic and we have been friends ever since. And we have stayed connected. We've been at masterminds together. There's a lot of stuff. We're very, very connected, but I've watched her journey and I've helped her out a lot along the way. And she said to me, she's like, the new practitioner I'm going to, they didn't even care like about all of the past functional medicine testing, the supplements I've been on. She's like, they cared about, what was going on with me emotionally. And she knows that about the work that I do now. And she's like, you're totally right. She's like, I feel like integrative and functional medicine have just become, green medicine. It's basically instead of dispensing medications, we're dispensing supplements and not really addressing the true root causes. And that really inspired me to do this podcast today because of the fact that that is what's happening in many cases, not all, but I really want to talk about how it might be harming us instead of helping us. And so we are going to talk about today specifically how there's too much noise and too many opinions in the, kind of functional medicine space, integrative medicine space. I would just say the greater health space in general. And when I say greater health space, I'd say health and wellness, not like, the pharma and conventional medicine. I'm saying like the health and wellness space when I say this. And how is that harming us? Because it's definitely harming us. Second, what is best for you is going to be different than what is best for the next person, even somebody in your family. And a healthy foundation matters. We do need a healthy diet and lifestyle. And I know I've talked about this recently, but it is really, really important. And that does matter. But again, it's going to be individual to you and not the same for everybody. So let's dive into that space. We're gonna dive into all of that, and we're gonna break this situation down. We're gonna break it down because I really want you to understand that what matters for you, it's unique to you, and it's going to be very, very, very different for the next person. And sometimes people think it even goes to your family. Sometimes that's the case, but often it's not. So I just want to remind you of those nuances, and we're going to dive right into this. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free stored trauma and emotions quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. So again, I'm going to go back to that conversation I had with my friend because we really got into the nuance of how natural medicine, functional medicine, wellness talk is really harming us more than helping us. And it's probably harming us just as much as, the allopathic or conventional world. And I know there are a lot of people out there that are going to be shocked by that comment, but it's interesting to me because, in this space, we talk a lot about mind, body, and spirit, but really, especially in functional and integrative medicine, we're focusing on the body more than the mind and the spirit. People will tell you need to, address your nervous system and maybe give you some suggestions on that, or maybe even might help you with a little bit of like maybe some breathwork ideas or tapping or something simple, but that's not really resolving the deep inner problems. It's giving, and I do this for people too, but it's part of a greater picture of what I'm doing with them. I will give them tools like that to help them in their daily lives, but we're really doing the deeper work so that they can flourish in their, health, have vibrant relationships, feel strong in their authenticity and their power and their voice. There's a lot that we're going to be doing in that space. And, like I said, some of these other things are just touching the surface. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that there is so much noise and so many opinions out there, and this is harming us because if you aren't educated, first of all, and I'm not saying educated as in you have to have a ton of background knowledge. When I say educated, and it's just knowing what's best for you and trying different things and just having a good basic understanding and intuition about what's good for you. All of the noise out there can be very confusing and lead you astray because you've got the first level, which is going to be social media and podcasts, just like this one. And you're also going to have, your friends and family that are trying to help you out. And also some very, often well-intentioned experts who are saying, this is what you need to do. But those are all you should do this. And I am not a big fan of shoulds. What I think you need to do is get down to what works best for yourself. And it's really interesting because a friend of mine, the one who I had mentioned I was texting with, she recently got back from a trip to Europe. They went to multiple different countries across Europe, and she's a functional medicine provider. And she said that her trip changed her paradigm, because when they were there, she's like, I didn't drink filtered water. I saw people who were smoking all the time. I didn't worry about eating gluten and dairy, all of those things. And she said the fascinating thing was, she's like, I felt good. I was happy. She's like, but what I observed was, all of these people, in these different countries who were doing these things, they all seemed very vibrant and healthy and happy and well. And she's like, what it really made me realize was that, your nervous system is really important and it needs to be regulated. And it also, made her realize that what we have come to believe is healthy may not be healthy. And this is something that I think I did a podcast about this in the last couple of months, but it was talking about these things, are the way that we talk about these things and the way we label things, is that harming people more than helping people, right? By telling you have to eat a certain way, that the candida you have to get rid of because it's going to kill you, or those parasites are going to cause cancer, or, all of the plethora of things that we often say, right? And I really do think that those things are harming us, because I do see people that come to me that are an absolute wreck and mess because they have been told that they need to, exclude 50 foods from their diet. And they're worried about, getting up in the morning and, getting immediate sunlight and then moving their body and then making, taking all the supplements and eating all the foods. And, that can become a job in and of itself. And that's not a healthy space for your brain to be in either. And so that's, she and I were going back and forth and having this conversation, and she had this massive aha and paradigm shift in the fact that maybe the way that we're approaching this stuff is, the way we're approaching it, the way we're speaking about it, and the way we're conveying it to people is not helping people. It's just, another version of, putting upon people ideas that we believe are true. And the next piece of it was, she and I were talking about, I'm like, I've always been amazed by people I have worked with in my practice, that people who are seemingly quote unquote unhealthy, but they actually, present as having, almost no symptoms and pretty darn vibrant health for being somebody who, might be a smoker or might be eating a crappy diet. It makes me think of somebody in particular that I worked with years back who was just that. And he came to me for something very, very minor. And when I looked at his history, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's doing everything wrong, wrong in air quotes. And we talked about it. And what I ended up doing for him was making a very minor tweak. It wasn't anything major. And it was interesting because on the other side of his life, he had a very strong sense of purpose in the work that he did. He had a very strong network and community. He got out in nature quite a bit and out in the sun, because he loved to just be outside on his property and would sit out on his front porch with his dog. But he hunted a lot. Like, he had his own a bigger property, so he could go out and hunt, and he would walk on his property, and all of those things. And he was very connected into his community. It was kind of a small, more rural, I think, mountain community, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it was really interesting because, for all intents and purposes, everything I saw in his history would say, oh, this guy, should be a mess. And we ended up doing testing on him, because I thought for sure, even though he said he didn't have a lot of symptoms, that I would find a ton of stuff. And I didn't. I found just a few things, and we fixed those few things, and he went off into the sunset, and I haven't heard from him since. And I honestly believe it's because he had a very regulated nervous system. He had a good sense of community purpose. And, for him, I don't believe that trauma was there wasn't a lot of trauma that he was holding on to. So that was probably about 10 years ago. And he always stuck in my mind, because I'm like, how is this? How can this person be doing all of these things that, I perceive to be wrong, and living such a healthy, fulfilled life? And so that was part of what also got me onto the path of what I'm doing, because watching that made me realize that, what we deem right and wrong isn't what it is. Those are just constructs that we place on it. So that brings me to the next point, which is, what is best for you is different than what is, best for, everybody else. And it's really important to understand what you need. And that comes into diet a lot of times is, people say, well, I should be doing paleo, or I should be doing, carnivore or keto or any of the myriad of many diets out there. When in reality is you should, if you are interested in doing a diet like that, you should do testing first, because a lot of times what I see is people do these diets and then they might really disrupt their underlying biochemistry. Like for certain people, keto is not a good idea because they don't handle fats well. For certain other people, due to their maybe ancestry, microbiome, and genetics, doing carnivore might not do well because of having that high burden of meat. So a lot of times you can try it out and see how you feel, but sometimes how you feel is not reflecting what's going on in the labs. I'd say especially with keto, because those markers can become out of whack. So if you're interested in doing that, maybe do some testing first. But also just, what I've come to over the years is I typically only use diets like that for people as a tool to help them get moving in the right direction. I really do think that people should be eating a varied diet and try to get the, cleanest source possible for whatever it is that you can afford, eat the cleanest source and, try to have less toxins in your life, whether that's coming from personal care products or the air you breathe or the water you drink. Try to minimize those exposures. But like I said, when it comes down to it, what is good for you is not necessarily what's going to be good for the next person, because you'll see, depending upon your genetics, for example, certain people might be able to tolerate foods that are like high cruciferous vegetable foods and other people not. Certain people might be able to tolerate more salt than others. And a lot of that does kind of get into genetic interplay. But hormones are another space. Like you hear a lot of talk, especially because menopause and perimenopause have been bigger topics in the last several years. And there's always the shoulds. I have a lot of friends who are in that age group and have started addressing that in women. And they talk about how the ways that you're supposed to eat and, the hormones that you're supposed to take when in reality, and how often you should be taking them and, the different forms of them. And that is a very, very nuanced subject. And again, it's where genetics do play a role, because for me, like estrogen, I don't necessarily always tolerate high levels of estrogen. And because of my genetics, my estrogen levels tend to stay higher longer because I don't clear it efficiently. So those are all really important things to understand. And that is my biggest point, and the biggest takeaway is understanding what's best for you sometimes does involve some work. And I know it's not what people want to do. A lot of people don't want to go looking at those types of things. They don't want to know, their genetics. They don't want to know what their, gut microbiome looks like in the inflammation. But I would say that if that is something, that's the place, the entry point that you want to start at, you should start by doing some testing and find somebody who knows what they're doing. Because like I said before, there are a lot of people out in this space. There's too much noise and a lot of people who don't know what they're doing. I can't tell you the number of people who have come to me and been like, oh yeah, I saw this functional medicine provider and, they basically I found out that they only took like a weekend seminar and then said they were practicing functional medicine. Or they went to somebody who said they were practicing functional medicine and it was more like we talked about before, kind of like green medicine. Like they very much were still prescribing a lot of medications, prescribing some supplements, but weren't really getting deep into the root causes. And for me, the root causes, like if we're looking at this as like a pyramid, root causes, at the biggest root causes where you would see that at the base of that pyramid is going to be that nervous system, emotional, mindset, beliefs, spiritual trauma realm. Like that is the most important spot. And then the next, we're going to say diet and lifestyle, because I honestly, truly believe that the diet and the lifestyle do matter. But everything else on top of that is just, kind of like gravy. We really do need to do things. We need community. We need to get outdoors. We need to regulate our circadian rhythm, but that shouldn't be a chore. It should just be part of your daily life and what you can handle in the moment. And as you deal with emotions, trauma, the inner work, you do have greater space to bring these into your life and integrate them as a habit and not something that you feel like you're being forced to do. Because if you feel like you're being forced to do anything, the chances of you having success with that is very little. Like you have to make the choices yourself and you have to believe it's going to work. Right. So that's, was my last point, was the fact that a healthy, foundation matters. And that is, mental health, that is emotional health, spiritual health, and, physical biochemical health, because there is no right or wrong. I really do believe that we are creating this space that can be just as harmful and toxic as, conventional medicine. I will say the caveat on, functional medicine being harmful. I don't want to say that it's harmful across the board. Obviously, that's just, an aspect of it. It can be. It is not always, but it can be especially helpful for babies and kids, especially kiddos who have like eczema or kiddos who have rashes or GI issues. Like they're in and of itself, because of their age, typically not in the realm of trauma or emotions, unless, there can be some stuff that happened with mom when she was pregnant that could be affecting it. But really, they're not in a space in their minds where they're thinking about and having this affect them in a huge place. That said, I do nervous system work with the moms of babies and little kids to help regulate and balance this, because that does aid in the healing. And if you have a mom who's like really stressed out and anxious, it is hard for a baby or a child to heal. But, very simple interventions can often help reverse, skin, GI issues, and, a lot of like immune-based issues for babies and young kiddos, even older kids. They're extraordinarily resilient. I will also say environmental and toxic illnesses like mold exposure, heavy metal exposure, that, those are other areas where functional medicine shines. And I'm not saying that you should ignore the mind and the spirit and, the emotions and that instance. But I do believe that it is important to address that appropriately, the toxicity, wherever it's being caught, whatever the root cause is, if it's causing you symptoms and it's manifesting in that way. I still think that is a very important piece of the puzzle. And so, like I said, just do what's best for you. Healthy foundations matter, and honor yourself in your journey. There's no, kind of like should-haves. If you are working with a practitioner, ask questions, push back a little bit. Like, when I work with people, I tell them that nothing is set in stone and that this is a partnership. It's not me dictating to you. I'm going to give you my best suggestions based on the experience I have and the knowledge that I have. But if it doesn't resonate with you, there are other options. Like, there's nothing that's set in stone. And I very much honor your individuality and your autonomy in this process, because we are partners and we're not, this is not a dictatorship. So as always, sending you lots of love until next time. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.